Recently, I was looking over some of the old Five Nights at Freddy's games, and in replaying them, I realized there's a lot of things in these games that I kinda missed. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like the modern games. I actually think there's quite a few things the modern games do better than the classic games. It's just, in my opinion, the appeal of the classic games and the modern games are very different. So this video is just going to be kind of me going over a few things that I just wish these modern games would do. So I'm going to start off with the gameplay here, because this is one of the biggest deals to me, one of the big things that I miss. Is the classic games were very gameplay loopish. The gameplay was very much just what you see is what you get, it gets harder, you beat it 5 times, and you're done. The gameplay loop was mainly about, resource management. There was a survival resource management gameplay. You gotta try and make do with your resources, and try to use them best you can to make it through. The modern games are more stealth adventure games. They're more about trying to sneak past an enemy, and exploring the place and trying to find things. These are very, very different gameplay styles. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't have an issue with the stealth adventure gameplay, not at all. I like being able to free roam these locations, I love exploring areas, I don't even have a problem with stealth stuff, I think stealth gameplay can be fun. In fact, I actually quite enjoyed Secret of the Mimic. But I don't think that it should have come at the consequence of no longer really having the survival gameplay. It's like Secret of the Mimic didn't really do anything reminiscent of the older Five Nights at Freddy's games. And I think that's a little silly, considering if you're playing Five Nights at Freddy's, you'd expect the gameplay style of Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, yeah, you'd expect something different if you're playing a spin-off game or whatever, but I feel like the main games should still stay a little similar in its style. I don't think it should be this different. So I actually think that Security Breach had the right idea here. Because Security Breach, it did it poorly, but it was like the stealth gameplay for the most part. But then there were sections throughout the game, very few in Security Breach, probably should be more, of the survival gameplay, the regular Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay that everyone used to. It was clunky because they kind of forced in the free roam in it. Each one was a little bit different from the last, so you couldn't really learn from it, so the whole gameplay loop feel of it wasn't there. It wasn't the same at all, but I feel like it had the rough general idea that I think was a decent one. And the other part of Security Breach that I think kind of had the right idea as well is resource management. Again, a lot of what made Five Nights at Freddy's loop compelling was trying to make your resources last until the next night. That feeling should be kept. Like, here's your limited resources, you gotta try and use them wisely until the next save point. And Security Breach had resources to manage, but they were kind of trivial. They didn't really matter all that much. And they refilled all the time. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but it's more than Secret of the Mimic did, because Secret of the Mimic didn't really have any resource management whatsoever. Again, it goes into Security Breach did it poorly, and Secret of the Mimic didn't do it at all. And I feel like what they should do, this is what I want them to do going forward. If I had any say in this, I'd say to keep doing the stealth gameplay, because I don't have an issue with it, and I think there's, if anything, more potential in the free roam stealth aspect than there was in the original point-and-click side of things. But each game should also have its office survival gameplay scattered throughout, and it should be similar. It should be similar in each one, so that the skills can transfer, so that you can keep the gameplay loop style in the game. Because obviously with the whole stealth thing, you don't really get a proper, not the same kind of gameplay loop you got from the early Five Nights at Freddy's games. But if you had these survival sections, and each game kind of had its own type of survival section, then it'd be like the classic Five Nights at Freddy's games, except between nights you have free roam sections, basically. That's kind of what I'm trying to go for. Have your free roam section, survival section, and then you loop it, new area you're free roaming, new area you're surviving in, and also have proper resource management throughout the game as well. I think that's what I probably would do, is having the resource management, have the stealth gameplay first, and then at some point you get cornered into a survival section, and you have one resource, your resources do not reset until you beat the survival section. So then you have to make do with your resources in the stealth section, and then depending on how well you do in the stealth section, or how safe you play it or whatever, can impact how difficult the survival section ends up being because they share the same resources. Something like that is probably what I would go for. So yeah, that's kind of what I've got to say on the gameplay side of things. On to the story side of things now. The storytelling of the classic and modern Five Nights at Freddy's games are very, very different. The classic games, the story kind of, the surface level story, when you just played through it, they kind of alluded to the mysteries in the game. You have some little story information when you're playing it through, but it was more so about getting you intrigued in the story enough to make you want to go back and comb over the game and give it a deeper look. And then you did that, and then you got all sorts of interesting, weird ways that the games told their stories. In the modern games, though, it's more so just you play through, and usually it's finding story information, because like Help Wanted had its like tapes hidden around, Security Breach had the therapy CDs, Secret Mimic had the audio and text logs. Basically just explored the area, and then you find the story, you get told the story, you play through the story, and that's pretty much it. There's no sneakier method of storytelling, there's no more interesting methods of storytelling. It's a lot more explicit, a lot less unique. Now, there is advantages to this. Because the modern games are more explicit, they're able to have, well, more emotionally driven stories. Like the earlier games were tragic in the sense that, yeah, children kept being murdered at Freddy's. But you never really got to feel the weight of that. It's kind of a, oh wow, I found this really cool minigame. Oh, that's that's going on here. Whereas in the modern games, you have a scene such as like David reacting to his mother being dead and him crying in the recording, and that hearing that's just so much sadder than what the earlier games did, even though the earlier games should have had sadder stories. It's just that because the modern games are able to have more emphasis on their characters and their emotions, it makes them feel better fleshed out. But again, the classic games were just more interesting to dig through. The stories in those games made you want to know more, and then you could find out more. And the modern games don't have that feeling. And again, just like the gameplay, I think you could easily have a good surface level story that's like as compelling as the modern stories are. You play through the thing, you collect the story information, get all that stuff. And then on top of that, I feel like you should also be able to get into the more secret side of things. Bring back like the rare events that give story information, the secret mini games. Those are iconic to Five Nights at Freddy's. And yes, the modern games have secret mini games, but they're not really the story driven kind of things that the earlier games used them for. Nowadays, they're more weird. I don't know how to exactly describe them. They're just different. They don't feel the same. I feel like bring back the more interesting, cryptic ways of telling the story, and and I feel like those can coexist, because you can have a layered story. So for example, like Ruin's explicit story was pretty good. It was about Cassie trying to find Gregory, and then getting all depressed because then she has to deactivate Roxy, and then she encounters the Mimic. Ooh, scary. And I feel like there could have easily been, in like the minigames, like you play the Monty Golf minigame, the Chica's, whatever it's called minigame, Feeding Frenzy. And I feel like maybe like you could have been like a glitch in the minigames or something. Or if you beat the minigames, you got like this whole other secret minigame that could have told you something like about the Mimic's backstory. So like you had the explicit story about like Cassie, and then you could have had the sneaky cryptic story telling you more about the Mimic. Because that's something that always bothered me about Ruin, is that you kind of just introduce the Mimic without elaborating whatsoever. I feel like that could have been easily avoided. Now I want to make a couple of like more minor nitpick points. Now the first thing is like the older games were Five Nights at Freddy's and the newer ones aren't. And I know people like to say, oh no, the older games were never Five Nights at Freddy's. Yes, they were. They were Five Nights and then a post game. They were always Five Nights at Freddy's. The only one that's more than that outside of a post game is Pizza Sim, and on a custom, I guess. For the most part, they were Five Nights plus a post game. The modern games aren't really Five Nights, they're just one night experiences. And normally that wouldn't bother me, because they're not set up to be, then okay, I get it. If the story doesn't make sense to be Five Nights, you don't need to section it out that way. The thing that bothers me is these stories are sectioned out. They just section it out by hours rather than nights. And that's weird to me, because if you're going to section out the story, then why wouldn't you section it out in nights instead? I don't know, it's just a really minor nitpick of mine, where it's like it doesn't really negatively impact the games whatsoever. It's just hey, this really could have easily been Five Nights games. There's no reason why Security Breach couldn't have been a Five Nights game, or that Secret of the Mimic couldn't have been a Five Nights game. There was reasons set up in those games to have explained it, and they were already sectioned out properly in order to be like that. It's just they chose not to. I can't believe I forgot to mention this when I originally recorded the video, but Help Wanted. There's an in-game clock that starts at 11:30, and as you play, the timer goes up, and it ends at about midnight. This is something I wanted to bring up, because it means that Vanessa canonically beats Help Wanted within the span of 30 minutes, which is really crazy, considering you cannot speedrun that game in like a double that time. So I guess Vanessa is canonically the world's greatest Five Nights at Freddy's speedrunner, and I just couldn't leave this video here talking about the time these games take place and not bring that up, because that's glorious. And I think the last point, I also feel like it would have really benefited, like the modern games especially, to do something like things like rare boot screens. Because the modern games are 3D, and the older games were pre-rendered images. I think that 3D free roam, I think that's just a step up and makes sense that series would eventually go that direction. I don't really have a problem with that. But there were things you could do with those pre-rendered images that you can't really do in a logical 3D environment. A lot of weird edits and stuff you can pull to pull some weird effects and stuff. And I feel like, and it's most important, like the camera angles, you can get some cool shots from the camera system and whatnot in those early games that you just don't get anymore. Now, Secret of the Mimic did have some cool camera shots, but you never look at the cameras in Secret of the Mimic really, so a lot of people missed them. I think what would something that would really benefit these games is having more ways to integrate these pre-rendered images into them, because then you could start doing some of the old Fights Freddy's creepy stuff again. Things like the rare boot screens I think would have really benefited coming back. I did really like those, and I would have loved to see some creepy pre-rendered stuff in the modern games too. I think something that would be cool to do in the future is something like what Secret of the Mimic did, where there's pre-rendered cameras, and you could have sections of the game that were not the whole proper 3D stuff. Like, I actually did something similar in my fan game. I made a fan game like about a month or something like that, which is a pretty crappy fan game, but it was mostly a 3D game, but then had 2D pre-rendered cameras. And I feel like the modern games could benefit with something like that. I think that would be a really cool way of handling it. And I guess my last nitpick, one last thing I'll bring up, conclusion's sake, the earlier Fights Freddy's games were always kind of felt like they could have been the last game. They always left the games off in a pretty satisfying spot, with very few exceptions. The modern games feel like they're always building up to the next thing. And that's fine. Like, if you're going to be foreshadowing the next game, then yeah, sure, do that. But I feel like there's a lot of big things in these games that feel like should have been explained in these games, but just aren't. So for example, we still don't really know what's going on with the arcade conspiracy. I made a whole video on that, missed a lot of things in that video, but that's a whole mystery in its own in Security Breach. Ruin went the entire DLC without explaining the Mimic at all. It just kind of made its existence there. Just put it there, and it didn't explain it. Help Wanted 2, I mean, we're gonna get all that. And the Secret of the Mimic had the very jarring question of how the hell did it get from here to where the Mimic is later on in the series. Like, there's big jarring questions here. And I don't feel like the classic games left things that open-ended. Because now I see these things in these modern games, and I think, oh, there's obviously going to be another game, we just have to wait for the next game to get an answer here. And I don't remember ever thinking that in the early games. I don't remember ever thinking, oh, we don't have to have an answer, we don't have to wait for the next game. But I guess, in the early games, we probably just thought we're never getting an answer, so maybe that's not much better. Because things like the Shadow animatronics kind of never got explained. But I also feel like things like the Shadow animatronics are not as big of a deal as things like what the hell's going on with the Mimic. Right, like the Mimic's supposed to be the main antagonist, it's kind of a different level. I don't know, maybe my complaint is a little bit invalid here, maybe all my complaints are a little bit invalid here. I wanted to make a video, giving my thoughts, because I've recently looked over those old games, and I wanted to talk about some of the things that I missed from them, ways that I wanted the modern games to do better. And yeah, one of those is definitely, you know, the gameplay style. I want to have the old gameplay style back, even as like a subsection of the modern gameplay style. I just feel like getting rid of it completely was silly. I want to get some of the more interesting ways of telling the story back, because admittedly, just finding it isn't as interesting as playing minigames or whatever. I think there's no reason why the Five Nights formula can't come back. And I think that we could easily have games that properly close off their stories. I know it's a small nitpick, but when a game comes out and my lingering question is, okay, I gotta wait for the next game now, rather than, okay, that was cool on its own, it just makes the game feel less complete. And that sense of, like, conclusion is something that I miss too. But yeah, those are like my 5 things I guess this video was about. Things that I wished Modern Fights Freddy's would do, that the classic games used to do. Alright, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. See you next time.